Today, we will learn and reflect on how the Nazi lawyers, and yes, there was such a thing, in the early days of Hitler's regime, drafted the Nuremberg Race laws that began the persecution of the Jews using the American Jim Crow laws in effect in the Deep South at the time. Now, some Americans may want to dispute this narrative, but this short book definitely shows how the Nazi race laws were inspired by the precedents set by the Deep South Jim Crow segregation laws of America. At the end of our talk, we will discuss the sources we use for this video and the blogs that cover this topic. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. Now, our author, James Whitman, says in his introduction to Hitler's American Model, the Nazis were not simply demons who erupted out of some dark underworld to shatter what was good and just within the Western tradition until they were put down by force of arms and the authentic, humane, and progressive values of Europe were restored. No, that was not true at all. The roots of the Nazi atrocities were the traditions of Western governments within which they worked. There were continuities between Nazism and what came before and what comes after. There were examples on which the Nazis drew, and the American race law was prominent among them. At about the time of the World War II, there was a small German-American Bund organization that only had a few thousand German immigrants members, mostly in the Northeast. The leader of this organization was convicted of embezzlement, and it was disbanded during the war. Keep in mind that although this video will show how the Nazi lawyers used the Jim Crow laws as precedent when drafting the Nuremberg Race laws, there was absolutely no support for Nazi Germany among the Deep South segregationists. We have a more encompassing video on the history of how Christians kept the faith in Nazi Germany, of which this is a very small subtopic. Hitler's rants in his book Mein Kampf reveal that the elevation of the Aryan race was central to Nazi ideology, and that the perfidious Jews were the cause of the Germans' woes. Their stabbed in the back defeat in World War I and the humiliation of Germany and the depression that hit Germany, the Jews were to blame for all of these troubles and for every tribulation that the Germans suffered. In Hitler's mind, in Mein Kampf, the Jews did not deserve to be citizens. They did not deserve to have a job. They did not deserve any possessions. And the Jews did not even deserve their family. Jews only deserve persecution and misery, and Jews should either be driven to exile or executed. Soon after Hitler assumed complete power in Germany as the Führer of Germany, his lawyers, working in the newly formed Nazi regime, went to work drafting the Nuremberg Race laws, which were passed in 1935. And there were three sections of the Nuremberg laws. The Reich Flag Law, which enshrined the swastika as the exclusive national emblem of Germany. And the Citizenship Law distinguished between those Germans who were simply nationals, and these nationals were still under the jurisdiction of the Reich and owed special duties for the state, and these are distinguished from true citizens of German blood, who had full political rights as long as they demonstrated through their conduct that they were willing and suited to faithfully serve the German Volk, or people, and the Third Reich. And the Blood Law tried to guarantee the purity of German bloodlines to ensure the continued existence of the Volk, or people. The Blood Law criminalized marriage and sexual relations between Aryans and Jews, and forbid Jews from hiring Germans as mere servants. Jews were only permitted to display Jewish colors. Jews were forbidden to display the colors of the Reich or the swastika. And mixed marriages between Aryans and Jews were both a civil and a criminal offense. In the early years of the regime, the Nazis sought to encourage Jews to migrate out of Germany, which meant that they had to leave much of their property behind. But during the war years, many Jews were shipped to the concentration camps and work camps, often in cattle cars, standing room only, and many Jews died in these cattle cars. The Nazis did not directly copy the Jim Crow laws. The politics of the two countries differed. The main difference between the two legal systems is that the segregation of the races was key to the Jim Crow system, whereas segregation is not even mentioned in the Nuremberg Race laws. Now, this distinction would become meaningless when during the war years the German Jews were shipped to the death camps, and when the Polish Jews were first brutally and then forcibly segregated into Jewish ghettos, and then these ghettos were emptied out into the death camps. There were many American laws that were similar to the Nuremberg Race laws. America has had many novel forms of second-class citizenship, particularly for blacks, but also for Native Americans, Filipinos, and Puerto Ricans. During World War II, our Japanese citizens were forcibly moved into camps where they were treated fairly well, although they lost most of their property and businesses in the process. The Nazis could directly reference Aryan bloodlines and racial purity in their laws, but the Jim Crow laws had to pretend there was an equality so the Due Process Reconstruction Amendments would not be applied. Now, miscegenation laws that forbid whites and blacks from marrying would not be overturned until the Supreme Court heard the case of Loving versus Virginia in 1967, which is over 20 years after the end of World War II. The race-based U.S. immigration laws likewise would not be amended to be race-neutral until the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965. America has a long history of race-based immigration laws, beginning with the 1790 Naturalization Act, which permitted the immigration of any alien as long as he was a free white person. The Reich Flag Law was passed over anger over the Bremen Incident, and in this incident, rioters ripped the swastika flag from the German ship SS Bremen while it was docked in New York City, throwing the swastika into the Hudson. The rioters were arrested, but then they were released by the Jewish magistrate Louis Brodsky, who wrote a fiery opinion denouncing Nazism and calling the swastika a black flag of piracy and a symbol that rejected everything that America stood for. This decision caused an international outcry that the Nazi propaganda machine took full advantage of, and the State Department actually apologized for this judicial opinion. The Reich Flag Law was a Nazi rejection of the American liberal democracy who would empower a Jewish judge to make such a decision against these Aryans. And one key document that links the segregation race laws to the Nazi Nuremberg race laws is the Prussian Memorandum. This memorandum was circulated by Nazi radicals in 1933, and it served as a basis for the citizenship and the blood laws. In both this memo and in the planning meetings for the law, the American Jim Crow models were repeatedly discussed. The memo discusses how shameful it is when German women consort with Negroes, stating this is illegal in the U.S. Deep South. When discussing proper bloodlines, the memo refers to Jewish, Negro, and other colored peoples. During the discussions on the memo and the race laws, the Nazis revealed their hardline views on segregation. Our author restates their views. Segregation would simply never succeed in Germany. German Jews, unlike American blacks, were too wealthy and arrogant. The only hope was that they'd be put down by severe criminal punishment. Jim Crow segregation was a strategy that could only work against a minority population that was already oppressed and impoverished. The Nazis found encouragement for denying citizenship to its Jews from the American Deep South precedent that denied to blacks the right to vote through various legal fictions, such as literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather laws, and by pure intimidation by the KKK night riders who lynched and terrorized blacks who dared to try to vote. The Nazi Supreme Court declared that the blood law was a fundamental constitutional law of the National Socialist state. The German Volk blood could not be mixed. The citizenship and blood laws were imperative to prevent further penetration of Jewish blood into the body of the German Volk, or people. Mixed societies were seen as a racially degenerate mishmash, and mixed-blood children were seen as mongrels by the Nazis. The Nazi blood laws were the race laws that borrowed the most from the United States Jim Crow laws, which at the time were among the harshest in the world. 38 of the United States forbid interracial marriages. The Maryland statute at the time forbade marriages between whites and those who were black back 3 generations, and was a criminal offense, and it required a jail sentence from 18 months to 10 years. Likewise, the Nazi blood law was both a civil and a criminal offense. And under the race laws, who was Jewish? That did not depend on your faith, but on your blood. You were Jewish if you had 3 Jewish grandparents, or 2 grandparents if you were married to a Jew. And what was the steps in the persecution of the Jews? First, Jewish shops were boycotted. Then Jews were fired from their jobs as teachers and civil servants. And then they were fired from their professions. And of course after that they were shipped to the death camps and the work camps. What did Nazis think about the American race laws? Hitler praised the American race-based immigration laws and American white supremacy in his book Mein Kampf. Hitler lauded the Confederate States for founding the healthy racist order he was trying to create in Germany. And the Nazi Dr. Mobius remembered what an American had said to him. "We do the same thing you are doing, but why do you have to say it so explicitly in your laws?" And another quote from Hitler's Mein Kampf. "The racially pure and still unmixed German has risen to become master of the American continent, and he will remain the master as long as he does not fall victim to racial pollution." And also our author says that Hitler proclaimed his admiration for the American conquest of the West, where the Americans had gunned down millions of redskins to a few 100,000. American treatment of the Indians provided a handy justification for the German conquests in the East against Russia in their search for living space, or Lebensraum, as Hitler first put it in Mein Kampf. However, the Nazis balked at the American racial one-drop doctrine, where only 1 drop of Negro blood meant you were a Negro. The Nazis thought this was too extreme. The National Socialist Handbook of Law and Legislation described America as the country that had achieved the fundamental recognition of the truths of racism and had taken the first necessary steps now to be carried to their fulfillment in Nazi Germany. One piece of Nazi literature noted that the United States, like Nazi Germany, has racist politics and policies. And they asked, what is lynch justice if not the natural resistance of the Volk, or the people, to an alien race that is attempting to gain the upper hand? Most states of the Union have special laws directed against the Negroes, which limit their voting rights and freedom of movement and career possibilities. We would also like to mention that there's a connection between the research in eugenics done in America, and in particular California and in other countries, and the research on eugenics in Nazi Germany. And there's a book documenting these links, which we do not plan to read and cover, since the pseudoscience of eugenics was exterminated with the radical Nazi final solution at the end of World War II. And I might add, our other video on Christianity under Nazi Germany covers the period when many disabled people were exterminated in gas chambers in Germany during World War II. Now, with hindsight, we can condemn scientific racism, but there were many scientists that contributed to this pseudoscience, and scientific racism was a horrifying field of study, which again culminated in the Nazi death camps. Scientific racism tried to explain what many whites saw as the evident inferiority of the Negro races, but which were in fact really differences caused by lack of education and self-worth. And there were many prominent thinkers and scientists going all the way back to the Enlightenment. And this field of inquiry was also squashed by the horrors of the Holocaust in World War II. And as a final comment, we're going to compare the incident of the Kristallnacht in Nazi Germany to the lynchings in the Deep South in America. The Nazis on the night of the Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass, greatly increased their persecution of the Jews by burning, looting, and vandalizing Jewish businesses, synagogues, and residences, and soon after sent most Jews to their death in the concentration death and work camps. This same type of violence had been practiced in the Deep South by the KKK and other racist terrorists. Likely tens of thousands of Negroes had been lynched in the years since the end of the Civil War in the Deep South and in the Midwest, going up through the years of World War II and shortly thereafter. Now, mine eyes were opened when I first read about the history of the defeat of the anti-lynching bill in 1938. Eleanor Roosevelt and the black civil rights leaders were pushing FDR in Congress to pass the anti-lynching bill. And at that very time, the entire world was also witnessing the horrors of the Nazi persecutions of the Jews. FDR was sympathetic, but he explained to a colleague that the Southerners, by reason of the seniority rule in Congress, are chairmen of the key congressional committees. If I come out for the anti-lynching bill, they will block every single bill I ask Congress to pass to keep America from collapsing. I just can't take that risk. So, in essence, FDR had a choice. He could fight the Nazis, or he could fight lynching, but he could not do both. And also, defeating the Nazis was an attainable goal at the time. Eleanor persisted in public speeches and in her newspaper columns in support of the anti-lynching campaign, and she constantly badgered her husband. Once she asked FDR, "Do you mind if I say what I think?" And then FDR coyly replied, "You can say anything you like. I can always say it to my critics, well, that is my wife. I can't do anything about her." Now, this supposed conflict was a good political way to push for civil rights without unduly antagonizing the powerful Deep South segregationist senators and congressmen. Now, what's distressing about the history of this bill was that this bill was not against lynching itself. I mean, that's a local matter. But this bill put legal pressure on Southern judges and policemen to enforce the law and punish those who were guilty of lynching instead of just ignoring the crime. In essence, it was a due process argument under the Due Process Amendment, one of the Reconstruction Amendments. And now we'll talk about the sources we used for this video. First, we have Hitler's American Model, and this is a scholarly work that primarily seeks to document the links between Jim Crow race laws and the Nazi Nuremberg race laws, and he also discusses the other scholarly efforts to document these links. We also had excerpts from Doris Kearns Goodwin's excellent book, No Ordinary Time, which is one of the best FDR and Eleanor books written, and it is a history that truly reads like a novel. Very well written, with astute observations. And if you like, you can also purchase The Nazi Connection, which finds the links between Nazism, eugenics, and American racism. Although we did not use it in this video, Victoria Barnett's book, For the Soul of the People, was a main source for our video on how Christians kept their faith in Nazi Germany. It is a real treasure because it includes long sections from interviews from confessing Christians on what life was like for believers in Nazi Germany during the years Hitler was in power. And the YouTube description has links to the video script in our blog. Please support our channel by sharing this video with your friends, and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons, and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, and please consider becoming a patron of our channel. And please click on the links for interesting videos on other topics that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul. Thank you.